19th of May, 1996. A Sunday afternoon on the M25 in Kent. Traffic moved steadily, families headed home, and commuters returned from weekend trips. Among them was a young man named Stephen Cameron, just 21 years old. Within minutes, what should have been an ordinary journey turned into a brutal confrontation that ended his life. At the center of it all was Kenneth Noye, a man who on the surface appeared to be a wealthy businessman and family man, but whose true identity belonged to a world of crime, violence, and betrayal. This was not the first time Noye's name would send shockwaves through Britain. Years earlier, he had been linked to one of the most infamous gold heists in the country's history and accused of killing a police officer. Yet each time, he found ways to survive and manipulate the system. How did a boy from Bexley Heath climb to such criminal heights? And how did road rage bring his empire crashing down? Kenneth Noye was born in 1947 in Bexley Heath, southeast London. From an early age, those around him noticed a streak of aggression. At school, he was known less for academic achievement and more for bullying classmates. He built a reputation for intimidation, and before long, he was running a crude protection racket, demanding money from other children in exchange for being left alone. It was a glimpse of the control and manipulation that would later define his life. As a teenager, Noye's petty crimes caught up with him. He spent time in a borstal, a type of detention center for young offenders. Instead of steering him away from crime, the experience hardened him. He came out sharper, more calculating, and with a stronger sense of how to use violence and fear as tools of influence. Far from being reformed, Noye seemed determined to climb higher in the world of crime. During this period, he also met Brenda Tremaine, who would later become his wife. On the surface, Brenda offered stability, a family life, and a respectable home. Yet behind that image, Noye's true ambitions lay elsewhere. The relationship gave him a shield, the appearance of an ordinary man building a future. But in reality, he was laying the foundations of a criminal career that would one day make headlines across Britain. By the end of his youth, the pattern was already clear. Noye wasn't just dabbling in petty theft or youthful mischief. He was shaping himself into someone who could command loyalty, instill fear, and operate in shadows where rules could be bent or broken. His early years revealed both the ruthless instincts and the double life that would become his trademark. By the 1970s, Kenneth Noye had moved beyond petty crime and was working his way into the underworld with a more strategic approach. One of his greatest weapons was his ability to operate in both worlds, the criminal and the official. Noye became a police informant, feeding information when it suited him, while carefully keeping himself shielded from serious consequences. This arrangement allowed him to build influence while staying one step ahead of law enforcement. Over time, Noye developed close links with corrupt officers. These connections became his safety net. Whenever suspicion arose, there was always someone willing to tip him off or steer investigations away. For a man like Noye, who thrived on manipulation, the protection of corrupt police officers was priceless. It meant he could continue to expand his activities without facing the full weight of the law. During this same period, Noye also joined the Freemasons, a move that gave him another layer of cover and respectability. Membership provided access to a network of businessmen, officials, and professionals, all of which strengthened his position. For an ambitious criminal, the Freemasons offered an ideal way to blur the lines between legitimate society and the underworld. To the outside world, Noye appeared to be a successful businessman running a haulage firm. His transport company looked like a legitimate enterprise, complete with trucks and contracts, but in reality, it served as the perfect front. Behind the scenes, it was a convenient tool for moving stolen goods, laundering money, and giving his wealth the appearance of being clean. By the time the 1980s began, Noye had secured a powerful position. He had friends in uniform, a respected public image through Freemasonry, and a business that masked the darker side of his dealings. The boy who once ran schoolyard rackets had now built a network strong enough to protect him from the law. But it was this very confidence, this sense of being untouchable that would draw him into one of Britain's most notorious crimes. In November 1983, Britain woke up to news of one of the most audacious crimes in its history. Armed robbers had broken into the Brinksmat security depot near Heathrow Airport, expecting to find cash. Instead, they stumbled upon a staggering haul of gold bullion worth over $26 million. It was a robbery that would change the face of organized crime in the UK. But stealing the gold was only the beginning. Turning it into clean, spendable money required expertise, and that is where Kenneth Noye entered the story. Noye was not one of the men inside the depot that morning, but he played a crucial role in what followed. He used his haulage business and connections in the criminal underworld to launder the gold, melting it down and mixing it with copper to disguise its origin. He turned bars of stolen bullion into a stream of seemingly legitimate gold that flowed back into the market. The scale of the operation was immense, and it quickly made Noye a fortune. But it also drew the attention of law enforcement. In January 1985, detectives placed Noye under surveillance at his Kent home. Among them was Detective Constable John Fordham, a respected officer with the Metropolitan Police. When Fordham entered Noye's garden during an undercover operation, events turned violent. Noye stabbed Fordham multiple times, killing him. Noye later claimed he believed Fordham was an armed intruder, not a police officer. His defense rested on the idea of self-defense in his own home. The case went to trial, and in a shocking outcome, Noye was acquitted of murder. The jury accepted his claim that he had acted out of fear, but while he walked free from the murder charge, his troubles were far from over. In a separate trial, Noye was convicted of handling the stolen Brinksmat gold. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, marking the first time he truly faced the weight of justice. During the proceedings, Noye's temper and arrogance were on full display. In one notorious moment, he shouted in court, "I hope you die of cancer," to the lead prosecutor. It was a glimpse of the ruthlessness beneath his polished exterior, a reminder of the man who had risen through intimidation and violence. Noye spent nearly a decade behind bars. Prison did little to change him. If anything, it reinforced his reputation as a figure who could not be easily broken. He served his time with the same calculating patience that had always defined him, waiting for the moment he could return to the world outside. In 1994, Noye was released. For many criminals, such a long prison sentence might have been the end of their career, but for Noye, it was only a pause. Within 2 years, his name would once again dominate headlines, this time for a crime that was even more shocking than Brinksmat, a crime that would finally strip away the image of the untouchable businessman and reveal him as a killer. In May 1996, on a stretch of the M25 motorway in Kent, a seemingly ordinary traffic dispute turned into one of the most infamous road rage murders in British history. Stephen Cameron, a 21-year-old electrician, was on his way to work when fate placed him in the path of Kenneth Noye, a man already known to the police as a hardened criminal. What began as a heated argument between strangers quickly spiraled into something far darker. Witnesses later recalled the sudden confrontation. Words escalated into aggression, and in moments, Noye pulled out a knife. The attack was brutal and swift. Cameron was stabbed twice in the chest, the wounds piercing his lungs and heart. He collapsed on the roadside, bleeding heavily, while Noye, cold and unshaken, fled the scene. Despite desperate attempts to save him, Stephen Cameron died where he fell, his young life cut short in a senseless act of violence. Among those who saw everything unfold was Cameron's fiancée, Danielle Cable. Just 17 years old at the time, she became the central eyewitness to the murder. Danielle's courage would later prove crucial, but in that moment, she was a terrified teenager watching her future torn apart before her eyes. Her testimony would eventually place her in grave danger, forcing her to live under police protection for years. Her life changed forever. For Kenneth Noye, the murder marked the beginning of a desperate attempt to escape justice. With deep ties to the criminal underworld, he was not the type to quietly face trial. Noye turned to his longtime associate John Palmer, a fellow figure from the Brinks-Mat robbery circle who helped him flee the country. In the days following the murder, Noye slipped out of Britain and began life on the run. The hunt for him quickly grew into an international manhunt. Noye had resources, contacts, and the cunning to stay ahead of the authorities. He used false identities, safe houses, and criminal networks across Europe to stay hidden. But the murder of Stephen Cameron had become front-page news, and the pressure on law enforcement was immense. Police forces across the continent were alerted, and the case drew in intelligence agencies at the highest level. Britain's Government Communications Headquarters, better known as GCHQ, was brought into the effort. Their surveillance technology tracked calls and signals linked to Noye, narrowing down his movements. Bit by bit, the noose began to tighten. Despite his reputation for being untouchable, Noye found that even his wealth and connections could not shield him forever from the relentless pursuit. In 1998, after nearly 2 years on the run, Noye's freedom came to an end in Spain. Acting on intelligence, police stormed his luxury villa in the town of Barbate, Cádiz. Inside, they found the fugitive who had once seemed beyond reach. The arrest was a dramatic moment that made headlines across Europe. After years of evading justice, Kenneth Noye was finally cornered. For Stephen Cameron's family, the arrest brought a measure of relief, though it could never undo the devastation of his loss. For Danielle Cable, it marked the start of a long and painful ordeal as the star witness against a man feared by many. And for the British public, the case stood as a chilling reminder of how one act of rage could spiral into murder, igniting an international chase that ended only when one of Britain's most notorious criminals was finally brought back to face justice. Kenneth Noye's capture in Spain was only the beginning of the next dramatic chapter. His return to Britain set the stage for a trial that would grip the public and test the strength of the justice system against one of its most dangerous adversaries. Security was exceptionally tight. Noye was no ordinary defendant. He was a man with decades of criminal connections, resources, and a reputation for intimidation. In court, Noye attempted to save himself by pleading self-defense. He claimed that Stephen Cameron had been the aggressor and that he, Noye, had acted in fear for his life. It was a calculated move, designed to sow doubt in the minds of the jury. But the evidence told another story. Witness testimony, the brutality of the stabbing, and Noye's immediate flight from the scene weighed heavily against him. After tense deliberations, the jury delivered their decision. By a majority verdict, Kenneth Noye was found guilty of murder. The sentence was severe. Noye was handed a life term, with the judge making clear that his crime had been ruthless and unforgivable. For Cameron's family, it was a moment of justice, though not closure. For Noye, it was the end of his years of running and scheming, now condemned to spend decades behind bars. Yet, beyond the courtroom, others bore the weight of Noye's violence. Chief among them was Danielle Cable, the young woman who had witnessed the murder of her fiancé and bravely stood in court to identify Noye as the killer. Her testimony was crucial, but it came at an enormous personal cost. Because of the danger posed by Noye's associates, Danielle was placed under witness protection. She was given a new identity and forced to sever ties with her old life. At just 18, she lost not only the man she loved, but also her own identity. Condemned to live in hiding because of what she had seen, Danielle was not the only one who faced threats. Another key witness, Alan Decabral, also testified against Noye. Decabral was a businessman who had provided important evidence linking Noye to criminal activities. But unlike Danielle, he could not be hidden away. In 2000, only a few years after the trial, Decabral was assassinated outside his home in South London. He was shot multiple times in a brutal execution that bore the hallmarks of underworld revenge. The murder shocked many and highlighted the lengths to which Noye's circle was willing to go to silence those who stood against them. These acts of intimidation and violence underscored the immense risks faced by anyone who dared to testify. For Danielle, living in fear became her new normal. For Decabral, the price was his life. And for the justice system, the case of Kenneth Noye exposed the chilling reality of dealing with a man whose influence extended far beyond the courtroom walls. After his conviction for the murder of Stephen Cameron, Kenneth Noye began a long stretch behind bars. But true to his history, prison walls did not silence his determination to fight. Almost immediately, he launched appeals, arguing that the guilty verdict had been wrong and that he had acted in self-defense. Each time, his legal team tried to raise doubts about the case, yet the courts remained firm. One by one, his appeals were dismissed, reinforcing the jury's original decision. The legal battles did not stop there. Noye also fought to reduce his minimum tariff, the number of years he had to serve before being considered for release. He claimed that his punishment was too harsh, but the courts saw it differently. Judges highlighted the cold-blooded nature of the crime and the devastating loss it caused to Cameron's family. Every attempt to cut his sentence failed, leaving him to face the reality of a life term. One controversy that made headlines during these years was the issue of legal aid. Many were outraged that a wealthy man like Noye, who had made fortunes from crime, was still able to draw on public funds to pay for his defense. To critics, it was a bitter reminder of how the system could be manipulated by those who knew how to exploit it. Inside prison, Noye was moved several times between secure facilities as authorities kept a close eye on him. His reputation as a dangerous and resourceful criminal meant he was never treated as a standard inmate. Yet, over the years, he gradually progressed through the system. By the 2000s, he was transferred to a lower security category and eventually to an open prison, where inmates enjoy greater freedom of movement. Even then, his efforts to shorten his time behind bars never stopped. But each bid was turned down, judges consistently pointing to the gravity of his crime and the need to protect the public. For Noye, prison life became a drawn-out battle against a system that refused to bend. For the victims' families, it was reassurance that justice would not be undone by legal maneuvers. In 2019, after more than 2 decades in prison, Kenneth Noye was granted parole. The decision was not taken lightly. The parole board carefully weighed the risks, acknowledging his violent history and the high-profile nature of his crimes. Their conclusion was that, while Noye remained a man with a dangerous past, his risk to the wider public could be managed under strict conditions. To the family of Stephen Cameron, it felt like justice had been cut short. For Noye, it was a long-awaited return to freedom. The conditions of his release were firm. He would be monitored closely and expected to avoid situations that could trigger violent behavior. Reports suggested the board considered his age, well into his 70s, as a factor that reduced his likelihood of reoffending. Yet the label of a notorious killer followed him into civilian life, ensuring his every move attracted public interest. After his release, Noye chose to settle quietly in Cornwall, where he lived with family. He attempted to rebuild a life far removed from the criminal empire he once controlled, but his past made it impossible for him to ever fully fade into obscurity. The shadow of the Brinks-Mat robbery, the killing of Stephen Cameron, and the years of courtroom battles all remained part of his identity in the public eye. Noye's family also found themselves under the spotlight. His son, Brett, was later caught up in legal trouble of his own, convicted in connection with a multi-million-pound fraud. For many, it felt like a grim reminder that the Noye name remained tied to crime, even in the next generation. As for Kenneth Noye himself, his later years became a study in contrasts. On one hand, he lived quietly, far removed from the bloodshed and chaos that once defined him. On the other, he carried the reputation of one of Britain's most infamous criminals, a man whose life story continued to fascinate and horrify in equal measure. Whether viewed as a ruthless villain or simply a relic of Britain's underworld past, his release reopened painful wounds for the families of his victims, reminders that while freedom may come for the offender, the grief of those left behind never truly fades. Kenneth Noye's story has never truly faded from public memory. Over the years, his crimes and trials have been retold in newspapers, books, and television. In 2022, ITV brought his life back into focus through a drama series, portraying him as a calculating and dangerous figure. The BBC followed with The Gold, a retelling of the Brink's-Mat robbery that inevitably revived debate about Noye's role in Britain's most infamous gold heist. These portrayals kept his name alive, sparking new conversations about how much of his legend was truth and how much was myth. Public opinion has always been divided. Some view him as a criminal mastermind who outwitted the system for years, while others see only a violent thug whose actions destroyed innocent lives. Whatever the perspective, Kenneth Noye remains a symbol of Britain's underworld in the late 20th century. His story is both a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and a reminder of the devastating cost of crime on victims and their families.